as Shanika was indicating in informal conversation, we don't, I think for committees like this, we don't have a formal sign-in sheet. So I would simply ask folks who want to make a public comment to use the raise your hand function in Zoom right now, and you'll be called upon. Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed to the next agenda item. And just to be clear, you know, because these are relatively, we're dealing with a small number of members of the public who are in this Zoom, you know, I intend to, whenever practicable, maintain a kind of flexible standard about allowing members of the public to participate in the discussion if they have something to add, but it's important for Open Meetings Act reasons to also have public comment on the agenda. So let us move ahead to item 3 on our agenda. The topics that we discussed last time, as well as the feedback that I got from committee members, both prior to and subsequent to the previous meeting, really came in 2 very different categories. One, which is represented in item 4 on the agenda, is specific policy questions, potential tactical interventions, changes in programmatic direction, you know, doing stuff differently inside the city government and particularly inside the police department. But many people in the committee have, I think, rightly pointed out that starting down that path without spending some time to establish a framework of shared values and goals and a set of mechanisms to deploy when evaluating potential policy changes is really setting ourselves up for problems down the road. And I think it's valuable to spend some time looking at and discussing frameworks for assessing potential policy changes and potential ideas that will be discussed later in our work. And so I wanted to begin by asking 2 different members of the committee, each of whom has generously agreed to share tools that they have utilized in their own other work to lay out a framework that could be of use as we move forward. And I'd like to start actually with the permission of the committee. I'd like to start not with item 3A, but rather with item 3B. Alejandra Ibanez, who among a number of other experiences is the chair of the Equity and Empowerment Commission in the city of Evanston, pointed out 2 weeks ago, I think very rightly, that it was important for us to deploy a racial equity impact framework, and was kind enough both to send one along and offer to talk through it with us. And so if you don't mind going first, Alejandra, I would love for you to share that with us. And as you can share your screen if that's your preference, or Shanika also has the toolkit and she can share it if that's your preference. Just let us know how you'd rather handle it.
Sure. Let's see how well I could handle the technology. Hey everyone, so
better you than me.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Hi everybody, it's good to see you all, even though I don't have everybody on my screen. I don't think I could handle, sometimes I'm challenged a bit by technology. So let's see if I can, yeah, I'm not seeing how to share. So Shanika, if you don't mind sharing the toolkit, I would really appreciate that. And while you set it up, I think if you can just open it up to the first page, as you set that up, let me just share a little bit real quick. As Daniel has shared, I'm on the agenda because I raised this topic about, you know, the importance of using a racial equity framework or a racial equity tool, in simple terms, as we engage on this journey to reimagine public safety in our town. I didn't mean to raise it as a mic drop for me to mention it and then disappear. I really wanted to mention it more like as a footnote so that we could come back to this as a collective to discuss it. Because if we are bold and courageous enough to reimagine public safety, then, you know, I feel strongly that we need all the tools that exist or that we can build off of to do this right. I am not a professional racial equity impact facilitator, but I do bring my lived experience, you know, as an immigrant woman raised in this country as an undocumented child by a single parent. You know, I now have the privilege of US citizenship. I have the privilege of a college degree. I even have the privilege of being a light-skinned Latina, but the work that I've done throughout my career has always been an extension of my values for building an inclusive community. And as a community organizer and in philanthropy, I've had the privilege of being able to do racial equity work. And so I am familiar with GARE, and I'm not sure if you have the.
Are you ready for me to share?
Yeah, if you don't mind just opening it up, Shanika, I would appreciate it.
No problem.
So there are plenty of people on this commission with us who are familiar with GARE, Government Accountability. Can you scroll it down a little bit, Shanika? Thank you. Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And if you don't mind going to page 4. You know, GARE is an incredible national network of organizations that supports government and all sorts of community institutions in being able to figure out how we go from the theoretical of what racial equity is to the actual implementation. There are actually aldermen, including my next door neighbor, but not my alderwoman Cicely Fleming, who has engaged in GARE and with other national networks that support municipalities like our own. And so, you know, they've actually have a network of governments that do this work. They provide support. And so what a racial equity tool is, right? It's just, for GARE, there are 6 simple questions, but they're really a practice of us asking ourselves very intentional questions when we are reviewing data and making policy and budgetary decisions, right? And so I won't go into all this. You all have been provided the link for this. But Shanika, if you can take us down to page 6, essentially, this is like a project management tool that helps us to be intentional about implementing, practicing racial equity. And if you can scroll down one more page, I believe, Shanika, sorry. Right there. Scroll up a little bit. Questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you. You rock. So essentially, this is actually a practice that our own elementary school district utilizes. So D65 uses this tool. And again, 6 simple questions. When we have a proposal to consider as a collective, these are the questions we ask. What is a policy, program, practice, or budget decision that's under consideration? What are the desired results and outcomes that we have to ensure racial equity? The second question about the data. What's the data? What's the story the data is telling us? Then it asks us about how we are engaging with those it's going to impact our own community. How have our communities been engaged? Are there other opportunities to expand engagement? And we know there's plenty of room for us to improve in this work. And being a year out from the census from our census work, we know that we have hard to count communities that we are committed to engaging. And so what are the things that we need to do to expand our engagement? The fourth question is really about our analysis and our strategies. Who will benefit or who will be burdened by this proposal? What are your strategies for advancing racial equity or mitigating unintended consequences? The fifth question is about implementation. What is our plan? And then the sixth part, I mean, all of this is important, but really this is the accountability piece. How will we ensure that our intentions are actually having the kind of impact that we're having? Are we reviewing and being accountable to the public about what our intentions were, and are they working out, right? And so these are essentially questions that we are constantly asking ourselves. And so I raise this as a consideration. I would love to hear from other folks how they have practiced or how they have put a racial equity tool like these specific questions to practice in their work. I think, you know, I just want to be clear that we're not expecting perfection here. If I can speak for you, Daniel, we know this is hard work. It's not going to be easy. Democracy is messy. And I do not engage in cancel culture. We are here to learn together. We are here to figure this out together. We will make mistakes. But, you know, I hope that I can count on you all to say, we're gonna figure this out together. And if we're gonna be this bold to try this, I would like us to incorporate these questions in our considerations when we look at data, when we build a collective analysis about what the data is telling us, that we will have a shared conversation about how we do engage the public. And even though we're not always going to agree on everything, but that we make sure that we are using these values of bringing racial equity to our town by the questions that we ask ourselves throughout this entire process. And so I just wanted to present this. I would love to hear from anybody else who either has used this specific GARE model. Again, D65 has used it. I happen to be married to a board member, and so I asked them, how hard has this work been? Very hard. They've been at it for 2 years. It's still a work in progress. But I really want to encourage us to use these really intentional questions or something like them to guide our considerations moving forward. And I'd love to hear from other folks, and if folks have questions or comments, I welcome them. And thank you for the opportunity, Daniel, for raising, you know, the process of how we're gonna do this together.
Thank you so much for that, that presentation. Just first of all, one quick thing, Alejandra mentioned that this was sent out to everyone. In case you didn't notice it, it's linked in the agenda. So whether you're on the committee or not, the public agenda has a link to this document in it under item 3B. I want to echo Alejandra's question. Does anyone else who's utilized this or a similar impact assessment tool want to speak about that experience, or does anyone want to ask questions about how we might utilize such a tool? Or offer reactions. Oh, sorry, Patrick, I think just unmuted himself.
Sure, I'll quickly weigh in, and I was all ready and prepared to just applaud Alejandra for bringing this to us, because I think it's so critical that we start here. I actually was looking at one point behind me. I'm like, do I still have that sign in the back of my head? Because Betty Bogg actually was teasing me at one point at the beginning of the meeting. This is the first time I've been in my office for about 18 months. So I couldn't even remember what was on the wall behind me. But the Moran Center uses a racial equity impact assessment that Chicago United for Equity put out. And Alejandra said it perfectly, that, you know, it is not rocket science, right? This is 6 questions that GARE has come up with. Well, you know, Chicago United for Equity has similar questions. And so every time we sit down to change our employee handbook, we take out the REIA assessment tool and we ask ourselves these questions. And I think it can be easily applied to any decision that we're we're looking at. And Gare's model seems like a great one for us to use. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Patrick. Are there others who have, again, experiences to share, questions, or feedback about this idea?
Sure. I have feedback here, or a question really. This is a council member Reed. Alejandra, thank you for this wonderful presentation. Thank you, Mayor Biss, for putting this on the agenda. Just, I guess, to let the lesson sink in, can we just run through how this would be utilized in this context, to do a quick case study or something along those lines, and then I think we're all on the same page.
I think that's a great question. I don't know if Alejandra, if you'd like to do that, or if we want to ask Patrick if there's a non-sensitive example you could use to illustrate when the Moran Center has used an analogous tool in ways that we're illuminating.
Patrick, if you want to share, I mean, honestly, I really just saw myself very practically, taking out one of my index cards that I always have to the side of my desk, right? And having the 6 questions and just, kind of encouraging us as we're looking at data to kind of lead us through a discussion about and asking those questions. I mean, I see it as a very practical tool and using those guiding questions as a way to facilitate conversation. But I'd love if anyone who's actually put it in practice in their sector, in their world, would like to share how it's been practically put to use.
I mean, something totally off topic from what we're talking about. I mean, the Moran Center, we got rid of paid time off at one point, PTO. And before we did that, we sat down and we used our REIA assessment tool and went through, I think they actually used 5 questions and said, okay, we're going to have, instead of a PTO policy, it's going to be called a take what you earn policy. And so it's just, take what you need, take what you earn. And we went through and we asked all these questions that REAI has outlined to determine whether we were approaching the removal of the PTO policy from a white supremacist lens. Were we blinded by our own privilege in shifting policy? And we ultimately, after we went through the process, concluded no, that this was actually a racially equitable policy that actually benefited staff across racial lines. And so we went ahead and implemented. But as Alejandra said, it is a tool where you stop before you implement anything and ask yourself these questions. Have you thought of all of these variables before you hit, send, or before you sign on the dotted line? That's just a quick, brief example of how we've used it recently.
Great, yeah, thank you. And I think, I think especially, I think having that kind of, and the fact that you both observe it's not rocket science, it's not some sort of incredibly complicated flow chart that you have to put on a giant poster board. Having a concrete, straightforward thing that you do that makes real what I am afraid is sometimes only a slogan, which is, hey, we assess everything through an equity lens. I think it's very, very important. And the difference between having a simple checklist and no checklist at all is really a truly critical difference in my experience, at least. And if you don't have that concrete set of steps, I think you can land in slogan world instead of actual analysis of the impact of your work.
Can I add to, I think my experience with these is that really what makes them useful is having those people impacted most by these decisions and the conversation. Like, Patrick and I could sit and go through this, and what we would come up with based on our own lived experience would be very different. And so I appreciate, Alejandra, what you said. It's really a practice, it's a discipline. And to me, the thing that's most critical is having the broad array of voices that are answering those questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, this is Betty. I don't have my picture up because I'm sorry, the technology in my computer is not working today. I couldn't find my video thing. But anyway, you can hear me. And this gear equity tool and stuff, it came here to Evanston and people went through it, and I'm not sure, I can't remember what year it was in. Anyway, they had it. People went through it, and after it, a couple of months, saw some of the people and asked them, you know, have you started doing what they say to do? Have you tried implementing? Have you seen any changes in your organization from using these techniques? And I work and have started an organization and have been in quite a few organizations. And no, we did not use none of those tools because the people that we was dealing with was all of the people that was ones that was being impacted by the actions and things from another race. And it was interesting how Alejandra, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name right because I was practicing it, how she came on and she described herself. And I'm saying, she was an immigrant, she was Mexican, and she came here to live. And the last thing she said, which I think we need to listen to, that she was a light-skinned Mexican, that people would look at her and would not consider her a person of color. So with that, that is an impact that a lot of people is being impacted with when you're talking about racial equity. You see my skin, and if it is one of color, then you interact with me different. And it was interesting, and nobody ever said that they had done that. Yes, no. We at the Citizens Network of Protection, we don't look at people coming in and saying, what race are you? We see you as a human being that is having issues and things with the police department. And we try to help you with those issues. Race doesn't come into play, and we have people coming to us from our race, and we don't keep track of, well, how many white people came this day? Are we talked to? We don't keep track of that. We say how many people came with problems that they have had with the police department. So we are not applying it because it's not race. They are human beings, and we look at them from that concept. So that's how we deal with looking at terms of race and stuff. So we kind of don't deal with it, and we don't have that problem with employees, because right now we don't have any. And when we get there, we will have all the tools and things that we need to deal with. So, but racial impact will not be one of the things that we will have to deal with.
Thank you very much, Ms. Esther, and thanks to all of you.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I can't help you. You have to speak up.
I'm so sorry, Ms. Esther. I apologize. I just wanted to say I wanted to thank you for your comment, and thank Alejandra especially, but all of you for contributing to this discussion. In my view, it's important that we make a commitment to analyze the impact of anything we would consider through a racial equity lens using, in my opinion, this is a tool that would work well. I'm happy to, we can talk offline about whether we should use a different tool, but I wanted to introduce this today to establish an expectation that we will use a racial equity impact assessment before we move forward with recommendations, because I think failing to do that would be risking making real mistakes. So thank you all for that. Now I want to move to item 3A on our agenda. Evangeline, who has been very active in the group Safety and Justice, has offered to share with us a kind of a single sheet that really shows the shared safety framework for thinking about some of these policy changes. So thank you very much for offering to do that. And again, you're welcome to share your own screen if that's helpful, or Shanika can do it if that's the way you prefer to present.
If Shanika, if you could help me with that, that would be amazing. Thank you. My name is Evangeline C. Mark, longtime 8th Ward resident, survivor of multiple forms of violence, including the gun violence that killed my son Yaquez here in 2018. And since then, I've been an active member of the Illinois chapter of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, which is a flagship group of the Alliance for Safety and Justice. Shared safety is a framework that we use to build an approach to public safety that is rooted in true prevention, true accountability, and restoring the well-being of all communities. So what we're seeing today and what was shared in the agenda is really this blueprint for shared safety, the concept that I just described. And the blueprint itself was a product of more than a year of research and outreach across California. That's where it originated. And it's offered as a free guide to municipalities that are looking to really shift the focus from over-incarceration to investments that will truly make communities safer. So this is just one possible framework to consider that could help guide our efforts as we look to reimagine public safety here in Evanston. So Shanika, would you be able to share the Excel sheet? Thank you for that. So to make it easier to digest the information, I put everything in an Excel sheet that was also linked in the agenda, just to quickly take you through what the guiding principles are for this type of framework, as well as the action steps. Let's see. Great, thank you. So really, if you look at the top of this sheet, the 5 guiding principles are at the top, and that's the foundation for shared safety, right? So those 5 principles for anyone on the phone are shifting to a public health frame, well-being is safety, crime survivors at the center, breaking the cycle of harm, and making the system work. So really what this is looking at, even all of the topics that were on the priority list for this committee really do fall into one of these 5 guiding principles. And in many cases, they're tied to the results of what we discover when exploring other principles, right? So there's a lot of interconnectivity there. And then if you move downward on this sheet, you'll notice in that column, the action steps, right? So these are the building blocks for having a visionary and restorative safety infrastructure in a community. And so I think we've all agreed that our objective is to get to step 3 as our biggest priority. But I'm left wondering, how do we get to step 3 if we don't actually move through steps 1 and 2, where we seek to understand what is needed and make the plans, right? So really the steps, the action steps are to envision safety, to plan for safety, and then invest in safety, which we've agreed is where we want to make smart, cost-effective investments in safety policies, programs, and practices, right? And then you evaluate and you strengthen safety. So this is just, again, one example of a framework that could be used, but I thought it was really important to think about this, not only about our end goal, but like, how do we leave a plan for the community? How do we involve the community in developing that plan, right? And how do we use something that's been used in other municipalities across the country with some great success? So that's my brief intro to the framework. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer. Although, just like Alejandra said, I'm not an expert in the framework myself.
Thank you. And there's a lot there that was up on the screen for a little while and then back down again. So with an understanding that it's a lot to absorb, are there questions or feedback on this presentation?
I don't have a question, Mayor Biss, but I think I do have a statement, and that is, first of all, just really thank you for diving into that. But I like how you stated that in order for us to get to goal 3 or step 3, that we have to complete the initial work. And I think that's paramount. And so I appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And this is Andrew Papachristos. I'm just going to add my voice to Nathan's and say thank you for that. And I was part of some of the conversations in Oakland around some of those different questions and tasks. They're tough questions, they're tough asks, but they led to some really good outcomes that I felt they're still working on. But I think this is a really useful framework for some of the questions ahead of us. So.
Thank you.
Can you say a bit more about how the framework was utilized in Oakland to help effectuate both a good process and a good outcome?
Well, broadly, in terms of the process, it's pulling apart every single one of those different stages. In particular, the two things that kind of stand out that were in there that we saw in Oakland, was in part like making sure you have some insights on the data to what particular things are. Don't make assumptions about system use, for example, or what services you think are available, really amplifying the voice and centering the voices of victims and also frontline workers, violence preventionists, not just law enforcement, folks that are doing mediations, trauma-informed responses, hospital care workers, and looking for gaps. One of the things that came up in Oakland, which we use in our work right now is, I love data, but what don't we have data on and how can we get it and understand why it's missing, for example. But those were just, I have plenty of examples in different spaces, specifically around issues of gun violence where I was kind of contained. I know much less about sort of some of the mental health response and other things.
Great, thank you. Other reactions or feedback or questions?
You have some hands raised, Mayor Biss.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh yeah, I sure do.
Mayor, I'm sorry. This is Betsy Wilson. I didn't want to impose since I'm not a member of the committee, but I did have one thought that I'd like to share about it.
Please, I feel I won't bust you for having texted me while you're in a car, apparently.
I was at a stop sign when I texted you. And I was talking, by the way, about just how fabulous Miss Esther is and how privileged we are to have her wisdom as part of our community. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. I think I agree this is a fantastic resource, and I was excited while I was reading through it. There was one thing that just set off some alarm bells for me that I have the confidence in this committee that it's not going to be a problem, but I did want to raise it. The document talks at one point about looking at risk assessment tools and looking for kind of hot spots in communities and folks who are at risk. And we have seen those tools used in a really carceral way here in Chicago, where it's been used to target people as suspected gang members or to target people who the the police believe are at risk of committing crimes. And we end up with police knocking on the doors of people who aren't suspected of any crimes, but they're told they're perceived as being at risk and they are going to be under surveillance unless they participate in whatever programs we mandate. So like I said, I don't anticipate that being a problem here, but when I hear the words risk assessment, I get really itchy about and of course, you can imagine the demographics of the folks who are targeted here in Chicago using those sort of tools. So I just wanted to raise that risk of risk assessment.
Great, thank you for that. That's really helpful and certainly, unfortunately, very, very true. And I think we must bear that in mind. So Councilmember Fleming will be next, and then Patrick Keenan-Devlin.
Oh, thanks. Just chime in real quick that I have had the privilege of doing the shared safety workshop in my ward based on Evangeline's educating me on it. And I realized we won't get to all of that in this committee, but it was super helpful in my ward. I think we did how many meetings? 3 maybe with the facilitator. So it allowed us really a chance to kind of dig down into it as a ward and then kind of come up with the guiding principles for safety for our ward. So obviously it's a different task than we're doing here, but if we were going to look at this framework, I think even more than the questions that it lays out, it would be important that we, as we talk about public safety, we have different ideas as individual teams and the people that—
I'm having trouble. Can other folks mute themselves? Because I was having trouble hearing Councilmember Fleming.
The people that we all kind of represent and what their idea of safety is probably going to be important before we kind of venture down making, maybe a citywide plan. So I don't know when we would have time or how we could do that, but part of what was very helpful in my ward when we did these workshops was that everyone had a different idea of what safety was, right? And so some people, we got into some people thought block clubs were great, and other people thought block clubs were just a magnet for being a very unwelcoming community. So one thing we left away with our community was that we decided in the 9th ward, we're not going to do block clubs. We're going to do kind of these welcoming committees. So that was all fleshed out during the facilitation of the process. So maybe not something we're going to do here, but definitely if folks are interested, I would say they should figure out a way to kind of participate in those conversations, because it really allowed us not to come with a lot of assumptions about what we all think safety, that we all agree on what safety is.
Councilmember, I just think I'm just going to say back what you said again, because I think it's that important. It's worth repeating. Both the fact that not everyone means the same thing by the word safety, and establishing some agreement about what we're talking about is critical, but also the point you made about how, obviously you and Councilmembers Burns and Reed literally represent a constituency, but many other people on this committee in other ways also represent a constituency. And I said this 2 weeks ago, and I'll say it again now. If we want to be successful in representing the values and priorities of the Evanston community, we're going to have to use our networks to go beyond the 4 corners of our agenda and the public comment afforded by our agenda, to go into our communities, do real serious processes to get input and feed that back into the work that we do. And so, to the extent that this framework can be a tool for those who have the bandwidth to set up a series of meetings, I think that's a really, really exciting opportunity. And for those who don't have that bandwidth, which is a totally understandable place to be, figuring out another meaningful, real way to reach out through your network, get public input, bounce ideas off of them, get reactions is going to be really critical, I think. Patrick?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I hope not to be redundant, but I just want to also thank Evangeline for bringing the framework. In looking at it, it actually helped me understand why I was fairly quiet during the first committee meeting. For those of you who know me, I am the least quiet person you've ever met in your life. And so I was puzzled as to why I was so quiet. And then actually I mentioned this to the mayor last week, that I was bringing the priorities and the agenda to my program staff meeting yesterday. And I brought the blueprint too, and they basically looked at me and said, "You moron, the reason why you were so quiet is because you haven't done the visioning part yet." And that's what the blueprint asks us to do first. And the other great thing, Mayor Biss, that you provided us today too, is that Alejandra started off by also providing us with a racial equity framework that we can now utilize too as we work through this blueprint, which I really think is incredible and would be a really great roadmap for us to use. Because I really think by starting with thinking about how we come to a shared definition, shared definition of shared safety, will inherently address all the priority areas and issues that have been raised by this committee. We'll see that we can build up our youth and young adult division. We can build up the mental health board. We can build up Council Member Fleming's alternative to emergency response system. I think it'll all just come out. And I think, Mayor Biss, you've already put in place some of the what is called for in the blueprint, like a public health issue. You were very clear at the outset, this is a public health issue. You brought cross-sector leaders around the table. So I think you can almost like check that box, like we've done that. But we also need to think about, as the blueprint calls for, community-wide assessments. And by the way, not risk assessments. I do agree with my colleague, Ms. Wilson, that risk assessments have definitely hurt many of my clients in the past. But looking at that, and look, you brought Professor Papachristos to us to be part of this. And so I hope to be able to utilize his expertise in thinking that through. And then Nathan Norman is on this committee too. And Kristen White talked about, it's great to have these questions about a racial equity framework, but we have to make sure that the right people are around the table helping us answer those questions. And so could we involve youth? Could we even hire youth as part of the Mayor's Summer Youth Employment Program to lead community conversations over the summer to help us have conversations? And actually, Council Member Fleming, I was even thinking about those Ninth Ward resident meetings that you had back in December around what is shared safety. Could we have those with youth leading the conversation in our community? So anyway, just lots of random thoughts, but I was really excited by those two tools that you gave us, Mayor, and that I think they really do lay out our next steps.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And, I think just the nature of Evangeline's presentation and I think both Councilmember Fleming and Patrick's comments make clear, one box that we're not just checking is, okay, well, we've talked about the shared safety framework and we're done with that now. I mean, this is a commitment to invest real time in ensuring that we do conversation to come to an agreement ourselves, and then simultaneously looking out to the community, facilitate a number of conversations. And so as I think about how we can move forward, what I would like to do, and we'll talk about this momentarily on the agenda as well, is to, as a group, select a few kind of specific operational questions that we can create working groups to tackle. And then during our regular every other week meetings, we can hear reports from those working groups and reserve a significant portion of the time to have these bigger conversations about arriving at a shared definition of shared safety, ensuring that we're establishing a real framework and process so that we're thinking about things systematically enough that we don't leave important issues off the table, working together to design a public input mechanism so that we don't just wind up doing something that these 17 people happen to, through their own idiosyncratic preferences, pick, as opposed to developing public input. So I think it's going to make sense for us to kind of move on two tracks. One is the conversations we have together and with the community about the establishment of shared definitions, shared meanings, and shared goals and strategies. And the other is, I think it's also simultaneously valuable for us to begin to dig into some specific topics. And so just to recap, at the end of last meeting, and so now we are officially transitioned to item 4. Sorry, that was not a crisp agenda move, but we meandered all the way from item 3 to item 4 with a brief cul-de-sac. At the end of last meeting, based upon the feedback that had been given during the meeting, I sent out this like ridiculously long list of topics. There might have been 20 things on that list or something, saying, hey guys, listen, there's obviously way more here than we can bite off in the short term, though it's great to establish the list for our long-term work. But in the meantime, send me your thoughts. And I collated the thoughts that people sent and included in the agenda, in today's agenda, items 4A through F, the 6 things that really received the most interest and enthusiasm. So what I'd like to do in the remaining few minutes we have together is enumerate those 6 items and see if we can pare that down further to at most 3, perhaps even 2, and then allow people to sort themselves into working groups. And then we'll have kind of both a shared commitment to devote significant time every other week to the high-level strategic and values and definitional questions, while also, for the sake of preserving time, embarking on the operational specific policy questions that we're interested in working on. So the 6 items are the following. The first is traffic and pedestrian enforcement. The second is really digging into patrol data, especially. How are EPD person hours and indirectly dollars allocated in terms of where officers are and when and why. Next was an item that was described to me as how we rethink the organizational structure. If we had the bizarre privilege of just building from scratch a police department, what would it look like? That item got a lot of votes, so to speak, because it's a really interesting question. I think yesterday morning it became yet more timely. The police chief yesterday sent out a resignation notice. What that means is that the city is going to now embark on the process of making, one of the most important decisions we make. We're gonna hire a new police chief. That's a thing you do that first requires a lot of public input before you post a job, and then I would argue requires meaningful public input afterwards as well, during the phase during which applications have come in and the vetting process occurs. I think if we're interested in rethinking the organizational structure and envisioning what the world would look like if we got to build our system up from scratch, that's a discussion into which ought to be incorporated the maybe less philosophical but super critical and timely question of what would we like in our next police chief? What are the characteristics and priorities and value systems and experiences that we would like to encourage the city to prioritize? What do we want that job posting to look like? These are all questions that are live right now in a way that they weren't when we last met, and that only are every so often. And so it's an opportunity for us to think about the connection between the discussions we're having and that search. Next is violence prevention and violence interruption strategies. I mean, we heard already from Nathan. Patrick referred to the work being done in the Youth and Young Adult Division. What are our thoughts about violence prevention and violence interruption strategies? The next is school resource officers. and the last is use of force policies. And so I don't pretend that these are parallel, right? It's not as though they all are the same category of question, but they're all relatively specific operational or policy questions that we could have a breakout group or a subcommittee or whatever you want to call it, really dig into and do some research, do whatever digging into data is necessary, and come back with a recommendation. So again, I'll say them much quicker. 1, traffic enforcement. 2, data around patrol. 3, rethinking the organizational structure and the search for a new chief. 4, violence prevention and violence interruption. 5, SROs. And 6, use of force policies. And so my first question is, does everybody, I just talked for annoyingly long. Does everybody, does what I'm saying make sense to people? First of all, like literally, do you understand what I'm suggesting, how I'm suggesting we proceed? And if so, do you have concerns or feedback about this approach? Kristen.
So I guess my question is, I'm a little confused. I think figuring out the working groups to me before we've figured out the work seems a little backwards. And so I feel like if we're gonna take up a racial equity tool, we should operate in accordance with kind of the intention of that, which from the tool that Alejandra gave us, data is really critical to identifying where there's patterns that we may not readily see. And if we make decisions about what the work is before looking at data, even though I know there's some data we all know, I mean, there's some obvious go-tos, but there might be additional patterns of racial inequity that we are not aware of, that if we take a minute to look at maybe even identifying the data or where there's gaps in the data and we simply just cannot know some of the things we want, to me, that data could drive in part what those working groups are, so that we don't get 3 months in realizing that 1 or 2 of the working groups is not in fact what the working groups that we want based on what we're learning as we go.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I've thought about a lot. Let me answer that and then we'll go to Councilmember Fleming. I struggled with this question a lot, and there are 2 considerations that made me inclined to do it the way that I proposed, though again, I'm certainly open to changing my mind if that's the wish of the group. The first is that, just to be candid, in speaking with different members of the group, there's a very clear tension between some who are really concerned that we might get bogged down and never get started if we don't pick some specific concrete areas that we want to work in. You know, I think that the idea there is not so much we got to say where we're going to get, but rather the question of public safety is so broad and so means so many different things that that it's important to name some areas that we want to dig into more. And that digging in will inform even the data requests that we make and the data analysis that we're able to do. So that's the first, just sort of, there's folks in the committee who really want to, who are concerned about getting bogged down, and there are folks in the committee who are really committed to making sure we take the time to establish shared strategic approaches before moving forward. And so I'm trying to accommodate both points of view to the extent possible. The second thing, and which is related to the first, is just that the question of what the data shows us is so enormously broad as to almost be ill-posed. And I think we need to, again, even just literally in asking of EPD, even in just literally making data requests of EPD, those requests need to be guided by some kind of specific direction. Otherwise, we may just never find ourselves having asked the right question that gives us the right set of data to analyze. So those are the tensions. And again, as you can see, I'm sure you can see by my affect, I'm conflicted here myself, and I understand the value of both approaches. And so if folks feel like Kristen, if folks want to move the direction that Kristen is proposing, I'm certainly comfortable doing that. But I landed where I landed based on an effort to kind of meet the sort of committee where it is. Let's go to Councilmember Fleming, and then obviously there's a huge back and forth, so I want others to weigh in on this.
And I can be quick. I think, Kristen, I appreciate what you're saying. I think I'm one of the people, like the mayor just referenced, who want to kind of get moving. But at the same time, having been looked at city council data for 4 years, I think my concern with going too far down there is that we also have like qualitative data of people's experience in our city that's not captured in any kind of computer system we have, right? I will also say, just from the police standpoint, we're down many officers. And so if we're now needing them to do some data analysis, that might take a little while. And probably the same for our IT department. I mean, they can do it, but we don't have like one shared system between the city and police. And so they have to kind of coordinate that. Melissa, I think I got this correct finally after 5 years, but they have to kind of coordinate some of that data and then make sure it's all private and so on and so forth. So that might take some time. So I guess my suggestion would be, if we move forward in these working groups, as the mayor said, the working groups can kind of think of what data they need, but that we as a community, or we as members of this group, would not overlook like life experience and people's narrative and their qualitative data, because I think we can get very focused in the other kind of data. And I hear from people quite a bit who have had different experiences with different members of our city, not only the police, and that's not ever going to be captured in any kind of quality, like in any kind of like data set, right? And so even DC Secluti will tell you, people, you know, have complaints about the police, but they don't always come in and make a police complaint. And so that would not be captured in like any police complaint data. So I guess my point is, if we're doing some really good community outreach, depending on what we're talking about in our working groups, we can try to ask the community what their experience has been or what their thoughts are. And I would feel like that might give us some really good information that is not in any kind of measurable that we currently have. And that also, you know, speaking of from a woman, you know, woman, a Black woman, you know, that might also capture some of those experiences of people of color who haven't come into our police department, or who haven't come to city council, or haven't filled out any kind of formal anything to really even be counted in a data measure, probably aside from like our traffic stops and stuff, which we do have lots of data on. So that's my 2 cents on the data piece.
Thank you. Sarah.
Hi, I just wanted to say I'm on the same page of I'm one of the people who's like, we need to start actually talking about these questions, or we're gonna hit our deadline and not have made as much progress as we wanted. I also think there are so many people on this committee that are each on here for their own reason, that the time it will take for each of us to get aligned on what we understand community safety to be will be, I mean, we only have an hour every other week. So I think we should be, by separating and going into groups, you kind of understand why people are on this committee and what their goals are. And I think that we can implement these equity strategies as we go in order to kind of accomplish both at the same time. Thank you.
Kristen, is your hand still up deliberately?
No, I didn't realize that, sorry.
No, not at all. So we're at 5 o'clock. Is there anybody else who wants to speak to this specific question? Because it is a critical question. Okay, here's what I'm gonna ask. Oh,
I do.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I'm not as smooth today with this technology, and I apologize because it's frustrating. But to Sarah's questions and everything, everybody came here with different reasons. But my main goal, and I kind of asked the mayor before we got into the committee and started, and the people being appointed, was what is the goal of this committee? What is the purpose of this committee? Because the goal of the committee and the purpose of this committee should be guiding what we are looking to do and to come up with. So we kind of need that to be spelled out and put in writing, and also that to be spelled out and put in writing to the community. Because you asked us to join a group, and this group is supposed to have a purpose and a goal. So we need to know what that goal is and what that purpose, and we can work to accomplish those efforts to meet that goal and the purpose without knowing that we are constantly kind of going back and forth. So not to do that, it would be really beneficial for that to be there, not only for the people on the committee who really needs it, but for the community that will be looking at the city website and seeing what you put out. So those are two things, and then we all can stay focused on that and not too much on our own set of reason and goal, which they do play a part and they are crucial, but they become even more crucial if we are working with them to help meet the goal of the committee.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that makes clear that there's a real tension here, and a tension that I think different people in the committee feel different ways about. And sorry for doing this again. Kristen, is your hand up again?
I am not putting my hand up at all. I do not know why. Maybe subconsciously the computer is sensing I have opinions, but I'm trying to not hog the mic.
Got it. All right, well, Sean just put his hand up, and I think we'll end with Sean, and then I'll end because it's past 5, but go ahead, Sean.
Thank you. I'm just asking for a little bit of clarity in regards to what we mean when we're talking about rethinking the organizational structure of the police department. It sounds to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there may be some, as I think you described earlier, intersections between that and some of the other goals we have listed. For example, we may delve into traffic and pedestrian enforcement or use of force policies or violence prevention and violence interruption strategies through that topic. Would that be a correct understanding?
Yes, it would be a correct understanding. I think the question here is, what is the infrastructure that government builds to provide for safety, and how does it get constructed inside of the city bureaucracy, right? So as it stands now, there is a police department that has a staff of somewhere between 140 and 150 of individuals with a particular set of powers, and there's other entities, for example, the Youth and Young Adult Division inside the Department of Health and Human Services that has a smaller staff with different responsibilities. If you look at the work of the alternatives to alternative emergency response subcommittee, there was a lot of discussion there about, should that new functionality be a entity that's apart from the police department in toto? Should it be a co-response model that works? These are all questions about how you build an organization to solve a problem. And that's, I think, what's intended by this question, which is why I said it's closely related to the question of what the city ought to look for in a new police chief.
Thank you.
So we're past 5, and we've sort of awkwardly landed on this point of some tension. So I want to ask folks to do 2 things. Number one, and I'll send an email out tonight that enumerates these requests as well. Number one, of the 6 items listed in item 4 of the agenda, send a request of 0, 1, name none of them, 1 of them, 2 of them, or 3 of them, but not more, that you would like us to focus on. So we have that kind of survey of the committee regarding what working groups you would want to create should we go that direction. And then number 2, if you have input on this question of how to resolve the question of whether to immediately split into these working groups or to first privilege the kind of level setting and definition agreeing and values work, just send me your thoughts, and I'll be very responsive to the wishes of the majority if I get a lot of input. Like I indicated, I'm conflicted on this. I take the point that both Kristen and Ms. Esther made very, very seriously. I also take the point made by Councilmember Fleming and Sarah very seriously. And so we can't just not make a decision. We'll make a decision on how to move forward in this question. But I don't want to do it without input, and I don't want to do it, forcing people to give 20 seconds of input as we're over time. So I'll send out an email with these 2 questions. If folks can get me responses by the end of the week at the very latest, I will incorporate that into a plan and communicate that plan to the group over the weekend. So is there anybody who has questions about what I said? And again, I'll write it in an email, but do you have any questions, clarification you want about what I just said regarding the request I've made of you for the next 3 days? So seeing none, thank you for the honesty and for pushing us on these questions. These are important decisions we got to make, and there's powerful reasons to do any number of different things. So I appreciate the directness. I hope that we can keep that throughout this effort. And you should get an email from me, as I said, tonight, and I would really appreciate any responses. I'll study them carefully, maybe make follow-up calls as appropriate, and really do my best to do something that both makes good sense and will work and reflects the wishes of the committee. And with that, seeing no further business to come before us, the Reimagining Public Safety Committee stands adjourned. We next meet 2 weeks from today, June 22nd at 4.